Welcome everyone. My name is Robert, and feel free to stalk me on either Twitter or Instagram or Facebook or whatever. Drop me a line if you have questions or answers or recommendations or anything. I'm very excited to be here, and big thanks to Maxon for bringing me here and allowing me to speak at IBC. It's always a pleasure. It's always nice. It's about the people and not necessarily just about showing stuff, but also engaging with nice folks as you all are. So thank you so much. Before we get started, and to also get the juices flowing and wake you up, let's get going with the showreel that my friend Michael Münch just finished editing a week ago. All right. Thank you. I saw you dancing, Jonas. So what I'm going to talk today about is a feature film project I had the pleasure of working on recently. It's called Das Ende der Wahrheit, and the English title is Blame Game. So it's a movie that's just been finished post-production and should be coming out sometime next year, and it's a privilege to be able to talk about that. And also it was a privilege to work on that because, as you've seen in my reel, I did a lot of commercial work, pack shots, and all these kind of things, and they're nice. It's fun to do these, but occasionally it's also nice to do something else. So when Florian Decker from NHB Studios in Munich asked me if I would like to contribute a few visual effects and a few UI graphics, as well as some of the title work, of course I jumped at it. It's a great chance to work on a project like this. It was produced by Wacom Film and Arte and CDF, so you should also be able to see that on television sometime soon. And that movie is pretty gritty. It's a spy thriller. It's I mean, if any of you have watched series like Homeland or Jack Ryan or Jason Bourne and that kind of stuff, it's a similar world, but much more serious. It's not like action-packed. I mean, there's a lot of action, but it's like a serious topic about intelligence and how the BND and the CIA do things and conspiracies and all that kind of stuff. So everything had to be based on reality and should look nice. And I have a trailer that I can show you.
Seit dem verheerenden Anschlag auf einen NATO-Konvoi an der Grenze zu Afghanistan gilt Bahir als einer der meistgesuchten Männer in der ganzen Region.
Haben Sie es vielleicht etwas genauer?
Ich kann und werde Ihnen keine weiteren Angaben machen können, weil ich nicht glaube, dass Sie über die nötige Sicherheitsfreigabe verfügen.
Sagen Sie, ist es zutreffend, dass der Bundesnachrichtendienst den Amerikanern Zielkoordinaten für deren Drohneneinsätze liefert? Ich brauche deine Hilfe.
Wir haben eine klare Abmachung. Berufliches und Privates drin. Ich kann hier meinen Job verlieren.
Die Geberländer beraten gerade darüber, das Waffenembargo aufzuheben. Wir alle profitieren davon.
Was hat sie dir erzählt?
Sie sagte, sie sei in einer großen Geschichte dran. Ich will alles wissen über Global Logistics. Alles.
Das ist eine klassische Geheimdienstoperation.
Das Attentat ist inszeniert.
Wir nutzen Menschen aus, wir nutzen deren Schwäche aus. Das ist unser Beruf.
So yeah, that's that. Very, very exciting. Thank you. So Florian asked me, hey, Robert, would you like to do a few, hi, Marcus, a few nice things, such as opening titles. I love opening titles. This is something I would really love to do more because it's almost like a condensed little mini movie. You have it's maybe its own narrative. That's a pre-story or the backstory. You have design elements like typography, composition. You have live action, 2D, 3D. So opening titles is something I really, really like to do. However, in this movie, it should be kept very simple and very just subtle. So that was fine. I said, yeah, then CG planes. Yeah, of course, I can do CG planes. I'll figure out along the way how to do them. But yeah, I said yes. CG drone as well, yes. And UI graphics. I love UI graphics. So all these things had to be created, and everything had to look realistic, not like this future UI things that you see in the great movies. Like Avengers or Blade Runner, but it had to be kept like simple and as it really looks in reality. So let's start by showing you a little visual effects breakdown and UI breakdown. NAB worked in a total of 70 visual effects shots, and there's a mix of the ones that I worked on as well in there. So let's check it out, how that looks like. So by the way, a big thank you to Epidemic Sound, who were so gracious about letting me use their soundtrack. So if you're looking for some great music for your work, Epidemic Sound is a great resource. So if you want to drop me an email, I can give you a sweet discount. I have arranged a deal for you guys, so if you want to do that. So let's talk about the opening titles first. Initially, it was said, hey, I would like to have like a fade-in. And I said, well, hang on, a fade-in? You don't hire a motion artist to do a fade-in. You know, anyone can do a fade-in. It's just a click of a button. So it had to be something more about it. And since this whole film is about intelligence and like the CIA and BND and like the German topic of the intelligence, I thought I want to use a font that resembles that whole topic. So I use like a DIN font, which is a Deutsche Industriestandard font, you know. So it's a very classical industrial font. It's not the DIN font, it's a similar looking font that I chose. And I also use the glitch effect to communicate the whole topic of secrets and intelligence, information gathering, like a decoding effect. This was too fancy. The second version that I created was also too fancy. So I tried to tone things down a little bit, and this is the working title, by the way, and this is the final title in terms of wording as well as the effect. It's a subtle effect. It kind of communicates it kind of dissolves in, and you can see how actually the truth is coming to light. So that's what these titles should communicate. So that was done, and you get those emails, we all get on usually Friday afternoons, and hey, we like the titles. Hey, can you also do rolling titles, end titles? And of course you say, yeah, bring it on, yeah, so let's do that, why not? So that was also something that came along while working on this project. And then let's talk about CG planes. This was done entirely in Cinema 4D and After Effects, and it was very tricky because initially you get those reference shots from Florian, and they had one Transalp plane available for the shoot. So this was used for a couple of takeoffs and landings, as well as some of the interior shots. And looking at the plane, it's like very bumpy and like a flying junkyard, really. Can't believe how these things fly. So NHB delivered me a 3D model that I can use. It was a great starting point. But then I looked at it and realized for some of the requested shots, it's not detailed enough. Some of the shots required it to be filling like maybe half the screen. So obviously there had to be some details added, like some of the pipes on the wings, the antenna in the middle, some wipers, a lot of decals and texture work to actually make it look realistic and used. As you can see, there's also a second version that has a different decal and a different flight squadron. That's after it has landed in the sunset and the ramp is open. And you probably don't notice, but it's a very bad ramp. It's like not really well designed. You have a little gap, and it's just rough. What I did is I just selected a few polygons that roughly resemble the ramp, changed the rotation angle, and actually the rotation middle point to the end of the ramp, rotated it down, added 4 pipes at the end, just to resemble like the holding structure of the ramp. And it holds up. It's fine because in the shot, you don't see it in an angle where you would actually notice that there is no detail on the ramp, so it's totally fine. Again, you only have to do what you can see. You don't have to over-detail your work, and that's what I find so interesting, because in a lot of movies and making-ofs that you see out there, you have squadrons of people, artists working on something that is either not visible or just on screen super shortly, and they spend like weeks and months refining that. And obviously, for me as a small freelancer, I have to be very careful about how much time I spend in doing things that you actually don't see or see very little of. So this is the info that you get from the production. So essentially, this is what the camera will see in the middle and down below. And this is a bird's eye view of the whole set. So to get an idea of where the plane has to be positioned on the runway. And that was the shot, the scene where the plane was not available, and this was this one. So there was no plane available for that day. A helicopter was available, thankfully. But how can you add that plane into the scene? Well, usually you would say if it's a shot that's been recorded with a moving camera, you don't have to have some parallax movement in the background. You can 3D track that pretty easily these days. You can use the built-in tracker in Cinema 4D, for example. But if there's no motion at all, how can you do that? Well, there's a very clever way, and it's been there in Cinema 4D for quite some time. And it's called Camera Calibrator. And the way it works is it allows you to select grids, and you place those grids along the perspective surfaces. Some of you might know Photoshop, and there's a feature called Vanishing Point. It's more or less the same thing. Instead of in Photoshop just positioning something, you actually recreate a 3D camera in C4D, so you can essentially drop anything in and it will perfectly match the perspective. So you can move it around, back and forth, and it will always look like it's integrated, at least perspective-wise, into the shot. So you just drop in the 2 planes, and off you go. So that's pretty straightforward. In terms of lighting, it was a little bit tricky because it was kind of like a dim lighting, so it was overcast, as you can see, with clouds. But we got those references with the sphere ball, with the chrome ball, as well as the gray ball, just to see how the lighting looks like. So you can actually add just a sphere in C4D, and you can create an HDR to match that look. So for this shot, I consulted my dear friend Daniel Henjes, who is a way better C4D artist than I am, and I said, like, can you help me with lighting this. I have issues with lighting this. So he was very helpful, and he used HDR Studio to basically relight that, or actually recreate the lighting by creating a map, an HDR map that has specific shadows or actually highlights from these clouds. So you can basically say, I want to have a highlight on the top of the plane, so you add a cloud there, or a bright sun. So this way you can really control how the reflections and how the lighting should look like in Cinema 4D. So it was just lit by an HDR, no external lights. The same for the sunset shot. And let me quickly show you how this looks in C4D. So the way you start setting up the camera calibrator is you have to make sure that the size of your composition matches the frame size of your original plate. Okay, so if this is a 4K plate, it has to be exactly the same pixel dimensions. And once you have that, you can add a camera, and then you go to tags, and you add the camera calibrator. Okay, so once you've added the camera calibrator, you go into image, and then you select that image. This is the reference plate, and now you can start recreating the perspective. So how can you do that? Well, for one, you go into the camera calibrator and go to calibrate. It's the third button here, and let me explain a few basic things about that. So what you have to do is you have to define what is the X, the Z, and the Y axis, and you have something like, something like street lights, red, yellow, and green. So whenever something is red, it's like, okay, unsolved, I can't work with that. Green is, hey, it's cool, you're good to go. And yellow is like, hey, try harder, come on, you can do it. So this is what that stands for. So what you can do is you can add a grid. So let's start with this grid here. I'm just going to be really doing this quick and dirty. So you go and basically just add those pins here. So you have to look for things that you can use as a reference. And then you shift-click. Okay, so you can see that I shift-click once. It says X, but it's not the X-axis. It's actually the Y-axis. And this axis is the Z-axis. So already you can see that roughly this is the position that it calculated. But you can, of course, do more grids. So let's add a second grid, maybe here. So you have to use things that are more or less easy to track with the just visually with your eye. So I'm just, again, very quickly. So this is the Y-axis. This is the X-axis. And already you can see I have more green than I have yellow or red. So already I could recreate that perspective. Okay, so you have to create a mapping tag and a background object. And I did a few more grids for the final shot just to make sure it's pretty perfect. So this is how it looks like. Let me just use the proper camera and show you the background. So whenever I dump anything on it, like a cube, for example, you can move it around and also in Z space, and it will perfectly match the perspective. So this is how these two planes were added. And actually, a fun story: I added the first plane here in the foreground, and they loved it so much they said like, hey, it looks nice. Can you add a second plane in the background just to make it more, expansive and really look nice? And I said, yeah, of course. It's worth 2 days of work. Actually, it's like, let me show you. What you can do is actually, let me just copy and paste that plane, and let's say let's add another one here. So it's that much work to really, but don't tell anyone. I'm just kidding. They know. I didn't charge them for that extra, so that's fine. But if you want to render that, a few things. I use just a standard physical render that comes out of the box in C4D, so nothing fancy, nothing external. And I use a lot of passes. That's something I grew up using C4D, and it's so well integrated with After Effects, using passes. And I always say that I'm an okay C4D user. Probably all of you are better than me in C4D, but I'm pretty good at After Effects and Photoshop. So I know how to actually fake my way into making the image look nice. And that's what I always say. It doesn't matter if you make everything look nice, like straight out of render without doing any post work. If you can do that, that's fine. If you are familiar with tools like Photoshop and After Effects, then why go all the way to make the render look perfect in C4D instead of just polishing it in post-production? And having multipass layers really helps you. Things like object channels, reflections, diffusion channels, illumination, all these different channels help you to create a realistic image. And the render times were not so crazy. I think maybe 10 minutes for the single frame. And let me show you how this looks in After Effects. So this is how it looks like when you bring it in. So all the colors and everything is pretty saturated, very contrasty. Obviously, because I created the textures and the plane to look nice, more or less as it is, right? But the actual plate is obviously not graded. You know, it's very desaturated. You know, it's the clean plate that you do all the work in. So you have to match the original look of that. So going in, and let me just quickly show you how the plane is set up. This is the shadow that I have. It's not quite transparent. I wanted to have more control over it, so I boosted a little bit the midtones. So let me show you what I did. First, I add levels and curves just to match the overall appearance. Let me zoom in a bit more. And then I use a tool called Sapphire Matte Ops. And this tool is great because it allows you to control the matting of the object. If you have an alpha channel or a mask, it allows you to refine the edges, and you get rid of that gray area, as you can see. Then I used Sapphire Warp Chroma. I always use Warp Chroma for almost everything. It adds those little imperfections at the corners. So let's check that out. See that? That little fringe that you get? And this is something that is also noticeable on the actual footage. So you have blue and yellow, and this was on purpose. It was shot with anamorphic lenses. It had to have this little bit washed out and also blurry look. It's pretty beautiful if you look at it in the general look. The whole movie actually looks very, very sweet. So adding the warp chroma effect just helps to integrate the shot way, way better. Then of course grain. And then again I blurred it. And then again another grain layer. So 2 grain layers, a blur, a warp chroma. It looks pretty bad if you look at it at 200%, right? But as soon as you zoom out, you see that it works pretty well. And once you add grading on top of that, it's all said and done. So let's take a look at the sunset shot, which was way trickier. So basic principle, again, you can see the ramp. What a really crappy ramp that was, but you don't see that. So let me show you what I used for this. Again, the same set of effects. Match grain. Okay, and now this is how it looks like. It looks okay, but you still have the sun in the background with this giant lens flare that's going across that. So how can you fix that? Well, I created a layer that has roughly the same color. You would think it's yellow or orange, but actually it's really just brown. So it's funny to realize that. And you mask that out. And then again, let's show the plane, and you add that on top. So this is with and this is without. And now the shot looks very much integrated in terms of color and overall appearance. So this is how that was created. And let me just show you a few passes along this. Again, this is without grading, and this is with grading. This was another shot where it's in the hangar. And of course, the sunset shot in its finished appearance. So let's check out the CG drone. Are you still with me? Everyone is doing fine, no one is asleep, okay? That's good. I mean, it's still early. Usually, I don't know. The CG drone, it was a very specific request. It had to be a Predator drone. I did a lot of research about drones just to be able to recreate it. In my opinion, you have to understand reality or what you have to recreate. You have to understand cameras, how they work, what shutter speed is, what aperture is, what ISO is, what imperfections are, how lens flares are happening, not just drop them in because they're cool, understand how it works. So it's the same thing for anything you try to replicate. Understand how these things look in reality, no matter if it's a plane, a person, a spaceship, whatever. So I did a lot of research. pulled up some images that I found online from these things. I raised tons of red flags, I think, on Google, because I was researching for drones and explosions and rockets, and they must be thinking like, oh God, what the hell is with this guy? So I have a black van following me around everywhere I go with guys with sunshades now. So I don't know if they're gonna catch me here or not. But anyway, kidding aside, I remembered I have the plugin Element 3D, right? So usually I would say, yeah, let's do that in C4D. But in this case, I knew I had this plugin with exactly that drone in there. So I didn't have to do anything instead of like modeling it, buying a model, whatever. I already bought it, I already had it. And using Element 3D is also enables you to have it more or less in real time in After Effects. So this is how it looks like. I added a few textures like the icons and the logos. And you can see that the gear is moving, the propellers are moving, so it's fully rigged. So it's very sweet to work with. But it was way too dirty and gritty. So I cleaned it up. You have all the texture maps available. Cleaned it up, added just a few splotches and scratches here and there. Added, of course, some light flashes for the position lights and the strobe lights on the wingtips and in the middle. And that's the final model. And then you get the plate like this. And usually you have reference, you know, like the light probes for the cargo plane. But for this shot, I didn't have that. So that's the DOP Christian standing there as a lighting reference. And you can see also the shadow here that this guy is casting. So this helped me to define, okay, the light must be somewhere over there. And this helped to actually integrate the drone that's getting finished and ready for takeoff. So if you look at that, and actually if I show you that in After Effects, let me just show you a few things that are maybe interesting. So this is how it looks like an element. You go to scene setup, and then you can browse all the different models that are there. So anything from shapes to 3D objects. You just click on that, and then you can move around, and you can see that this is how it looks like. You can change the lighting, and all you have to do is basically click OK, and it's right there. So you can use the camera to navigate around, the standard After Effects camera, and you can also, for example, use C4D models that you import into this, so that works as well. And these models probably were done in C4D anyway, so that's pretty cool. But if you look at the drone from a front view, and let me just show you with the integrated version, you will notice two things. First of all, again, it's too contrasty, just as with the cargo plane, so we know how to fix that already. So let me just go ahead and fix those things. So just activate the levels. So that's now better integrated. But the wings are curved upwards, right? So why is that? Because this is for the flying motion. So whenever the plane is flying, the wings go up from aerodynamics, right? But the plane is on the ground, so the wings actually have their own weight, so they should be curved down. So how can you fix that? Well, you would think, of course, you go into 3D, then you select the polygons, you bend them down. Of course, you can do that. But there's a way easier way, and there's no need to actually change the 3D object for that. So what I do is I select the plane. I go to the puppet pin tool. I click on the wing once, twice, 3, 4, 5, and 6. And what this allows me is to control and to morph the plane so I can make it wave, or I can just subtly get the wings down a little bit on the left and on the right side, just to make sure it's right there. And if you look at it like this, you can see it's way more realistic. Just adding some weight and believability to the shot. But there's a few more things that needed to be done. So if you look at the shot, you will see that it seems very static. If you see that on the big screen, obviously it's not there for too long, but still you realize there's nothing happening apart from these guys just checking the plane. So I remember that I'm pretty much into planes and helicopters, so I know that they have like those red remove before flight things that you also have as a keychain holder or keylace holder. So I called up a friend of mine that works at a helicopter company and asked him like, hey, do those helicopters have these things as well? And he said, yeah, we have that on the blade tips of the rotors, you know, and it's like a protection bag when you put the helicopter away. I don't know what, like the silver foil. So he gave me one of those bags. It's like 5 meters long, so I rolled it up. went back to the studio, into our special green screen studio, as you can see. You know, it's in our backyard. It's like super high end. So we're holding up this. A friend of mine was holding the bag. I was holding just my iPhone in portrait mode, just to capture a lot of pixels. Okay, so if you don't, you know, it makes sense, you know, to capture it in so you have a lot of, I mean, way too many pixels than I needed. I filmed it in 4K, but it was not moving because there was literally no wind. So I said, I think to Daniel, like, come on, you have to like, you have to blow this thing so it's kind of like flapping in the wind. And then keyed it out really quickly. And then you just distribute it along the Predator drone, and then you add some grading to that, and it's done. You know, so just those little things. Why do that, for example, in 3D and animate and do simulations and render? I don't know. It's like took me like a couple of minutes to really just film that, and off you go. And if you look closely, you'll also see that that thing here is also moving. Just a little detail that adds this extra special touch to that. So yeah, this is how the drone was created. And let's talk about UI graphics. The UI graphics for this had to be, again, also believable and based on reality. And how do I find out how this graphics look like? Well, again, I did a lot of research online, raised a lot of red flags again. So 2 vans are following me now. So this guy's, what the hell is this guy doing? Yeah, I'm just working for a movie. So finding out how these interfaces look like, I discovered that these are the movie sets. This is the pilot room, and this is the Air Force control base thing. And they're all 4x3, so they were all green screened, and all the interfaces had to be added in. So I started creating and building these in After Effects, and there was a lot of flying footage from a quadrocopter that was sent to me. So I had a lot of aerial clips that I could integrate for the flying period. But looking at the film, and this is like a super crucial film scene that actually has an important narrative about a drone strike that's going to trigger a lot of other bad things, and it's just a terrible topic. But I knew that when they want to make the drone ready, I had to have a shot that is more on the ground. Okay, so you need to see a runway, an airport, and I didn't have that. And it happened that just like a week later, I was traveling, and I quickly looked out of the window on the plane, and I realized that, took a quick photo, photoshopped it, raised the ground so it looks like it's more lower to the ground, added some effects, blurs, grains, inverted it to create this night vision thermo look, added a vignette, added a CG drone, another one on the runway, and the UI. And of course, I also animated the drone just slightly, so it's just moving a little bit. You might think, why go the extra mile just to animate that for a few frames? And also you can see the grain is moving, the time is actually ticking. And it's those details, if you look at the breakdown, that just make it more believable, because there's something moving. It's a static shot again, but just having this little extra makes it look like, okay, there's like an airport and there's things going on, and sells the shot. But there's also full screen UI. And Daniel was teasing me, and I know he's maybe watching, I don't know. But it's 4x3, and all of a sudden you have something like this. And I know, consistency-wise, why would you have a widescreen? You don't have that in reality. But then again, it's a movie. It's about telling a story. So it would look really weird if you have this super wide aspect ratio, and then you have something that's maybe only like a little square in the middle. So I extended the UI for the full screen shots that you can see. And it was also challenging because the original plate, the original footage was with a quadrocopter that's just flying straight. Okay, it's just flying straight, but there was no dynamic flying motion. So I wanted to add that. So let me show you how this was done. In fact, I'll also explain a little bit about how the UI in general was created. So I used shape layers. Who knows shape layers in After Effects? Jonas knows it, okay. Everyone else is probably using Illustrator and just dumping Illustrator in and importing that. And well, you can also create shape layers out of Illustrator files, which is great. But you can also work in After Effects almost as you would in Illustrator. You can have vectors, vector shapes that you can work with. And the fantastic thing about shape layers is that you can use different effects like repeaters, for example. It's almost like a MoGraph module. So you can repeat those lines You can also add, I don't know, let's say 30 copies for this one. And everything is scalable. It's all vector-based. So why is it also great? Because, for example, if the client comes in and says, yeah, I want to have those lines thicker, you can do that just with a click of a button. So you're very flexible at how you build those things. So the entire UI interface was built using shape layers. So this is how it looks like. And let me just play that back a little bit. And you will see it's kind of like not lined up. So why is that? Well, let me explain what I have here. So this is the master comp. And in the master comp, I have my UI, which is this comp here. And to this UI, I added a fast blur and a sapphire glow, just to make it look more realistic. But if I would have had the background integrated with that, it will also glow. I don't want that. I just want to have the UI glowing. So obviously, the flight footage is separate. So let's go in and check out the actual pre-comp of the UI. And let me show you how this thing moves and how it behaves. Well, you have a few things. A kind gentleman yesterday explained to me after my demo, because I said I didn't know what all these things mean. I know what this means is like the angle, the pitch ladder, and this is the compass. But he explained to me that this is the flight speed and this is the altitude. So I learned something. And I asked him, like, so does it look believable? And he was like, yeah, it's pretty believable. So it was like, yes. So he's into planes and I don't know what. But so that was fine. So how does this work? Well, everything is, not everything, but everything that has to move is connected to a null object. Okay, so whenever I move that null object, you will see that it will move. Okay, so if I move that up and down, it will move up and down. But I have also a hidden layer here, which is the flight footage. And if you look at the flight footage, you will see it's just a straight-on flight, nothing really happening. And you all can see a little bit of the props here on the top. So going back, this has to be hidden, obviously, but this is just like a guide layer. And what I can do is I can parent that to this footage layer. So whenever I rotate that, this will move accordingly. But how can you link that to the main composition? Well, let me show you. Let's go back to the master UI. And now I take the master UI comp and drag it out. So I have two layers here, okay? So this is the master layer, and this is the UI layer. Okay? So going to the master layer, I can lock the view. So whenever I jump to this layer, this will not change the view, okay? So I'm seeing this, but I can control now both of them. So what I can do now is, I want to control, in my master layer, I want to control the flight footage. So I control, or alt-click, option-click, and then I drag this to this, and the same for rotation, and I link the two. So as soon as these two are linked, I can control that. So for example, when I control it, I can also hide it here. You know, nothing will happen. You still see that. So when I say like, okay, I want to twist it a little bit like this, it will follow. If I move it down, it will follow. So this way you can easily create this flying motion and make it appear as everything is connected, although it's just a straightforward flight path. Does it make sense? Yeah? So this is how you can actually work with two composition layers open with this one locked. So it's this is how it looks like, yeah. And to round it up, you can also add a few extra details, like if you go in, and let me just unhide that and close that. If you have that null, you can also go ahead and control-click and add a little expression that says wiggle 20 times colon 10. And this will add some shakiness. Of course, this is way too much. So let's tone that down a little bit. Let's say maybe 5 and 10. So this way you have a little bit of shake. So it's not like a cruising Airbus, I don't know, plane, but like a really small little plane that's shaking. So this will add a lot of believability to the flying motion. So let me show you really quickly how the explosion elements were done. So for this one, we have that material. This is the top-down shot of the aerial film set. And to create the actual look, I used a set of different effects. So first of all, you invert, then added curves to give it more contrast, then hue saturation to desaturate the image by 80% or 90%, and then curves to get some detail back and contrast. And the explosion actually is something that is very simple. Again, I have no idea about X particles, but I know particular. So I used trap code particular from Red Giant to create this explosion. So this is one layer, and this is the second layer. So you have a little bit of explosions. And again, with this thermo night vision look, usually what happens is everything that is hot is white, and everything that is black is cold. So if I show you everything, you will see that once the explosion happens, you have this white flash, but the look is below the explosion. So if I would have the actual drone look above that, it would not work because it would be like a black or dark area. So this has to be below that. There is a white flash that's just with the add mode, just to make this overexposed look. There's also a little detail like where the rocket is flying in. And again, very important shot for the narrative of the story. So I had to make sure that this works quite nice. Actually, I tested it, put this on my phone, showed it to a friend, or actually friends, and said like, so look at this. And they're like, oh, that's terrible. And it's like, yeah, it is, but it's not real. And they're like, what do you mean? I thought it's from the news. And they're like, no. I created that on my computer. And they were like, oh, really? Okay. So that kind of told me that the shot works more or less because it looks believable. Of the news that unfortunately we're used to seeing. So this is how that was created. And again, it's not a perfect explosion, but it's only on screen for maybe a second or so. So I think it works quite well. And this is a quick breakdown again of all the elements that were used. And with that being said, thank you so much for joining me this early in the day. My name is Hranitzky, and stay tuned for another exciting presentation that's coming up in about 15 minutes. So hang tight. Thank you again for everyone online, and see you soon.